They knew her as a ghost story first. A whisper passed between the teams in the hangar bays and the chow halls of bases that didn't officially exist. They said there was a woman, an operative attached to a clandestine branch of the agency, who moved through the badlands of the Horn of Africa with a silence that defied logic. They said she could find anyone, anywhere, and that when she did, her enemies simply vanished. The SEALs of SEAL Team 4, Bravo Platoon, had heard the rumors, but they dealt in hard intel and cold steel, not folklore. To them, she was just another legend, a story to pass the time during the interminable waiting. That was before their chief called them into the dusty, stifling heat of the ops shed at Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti, before they found out the ghost was real and she was being assigned to them. Her name was Captain Maya Vasquez, and the file photo pinned to the corkboard showed a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and sun-bronzed skin, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was shorter than most of them, lean where they were bulky with muscle. The men, draped over worn wooden chairs and ammo crates, scanned the sparse details of her service record with skeptical eyes. Cryptic linguist. Cultural liaison. The word contractor was stamped in red across the top, a designation that placed her in a gray world between the military and the intelligence community. They saw the emblem of a defense contractor, not the eagle of the Navy. To men who bled for their trident insignias, she was a civilian, a liability. "All right, listen up," the chief, a grizzled bull of a man named O'Malley, growled, his voice cutting through the low murmur. "This is Captain Vasquez. She's our ticket to the dance. We've been chasing a high-value target, a warlord calling himself the Director, for 18 months. He runs weapons and fighters across the border from Ethiopia into Somaliland, and he operates like a phantom. No patterns, no technology, no trail. Captain Vasquez has been on the ground for 6 months, and she's built the profile that's going to put him in our crosshairs. She knows the terrain, the tribes, and the target better than anyone alive. She's the asset now. You treat her like one of the team. That's an order." The skepticism didn't vanish. It just went underground. When Maya walked in a few minutes later, she was met with a wall of silent, appraising stares. She was dressed in practical, sand-colored gear, as a compact carbine slung across her chest. She didn't flinch under their scrutiny. She introduced herself in a voice that was calm and steady, a voice that had clearly learned to project authority without shouting. She spoke about the target, laying out his network, with a clarity that impressed even the most cynical among them. She knew the names of his cousins, his money men, his favored routes through the jagged, unforgiving mountain passes. But while her knowledge was undeniable, her presence was an intrusion. Later that evening, as the team prepped their gear for a mission scheduled for dawn, the resentment boiled over. It was Mitch Hummer Harrison, a massive operator with a shaved head and a voice like grinding gravel, who gave voice to it. Maya was running a final systems check on a small hand-launched drone, as a piece of tech she'd brought with her. Hummer loomed over her. "You know, back home, ma'am, we call your kind Blue Falcons," he said, the term hanging in the air. It was a crude military euphemism, the initials standing for Buddy Fucker. You fly in, drop your intel, and fly out. We're the ones who have to kick the doors down based on what you pencil pushers dream up. Maya didn't look up from her drone. She finished tightening a connection before responding, her voice low and even. "I understand the concern, Harrison, but I'm not kicking doors down with a pencil. I've spent the last 6 months sleeping in caves and drinking goat's milk with the very people you're about to meet on the other end of your rifle. I know the sound of an AK-47 being cleaned in the next room. I know the smell of a village before a raid. I've earned the right to be here, just not in a way you recognize." Her words were a challenge, but it was a challenge they were eager to meet. The next morning, as the gray light of pre-dawn painted the sky, the platoon loaded into 2 MH-60 Blackhawks. Maya sat quietly, her drone packed away, her eyes fixed on the rugged landscape sliding by below. The mission was a simple capture-or-kill operation on a compound deep in the Golis Mountains. The insertion was textbook, the team fast-roping onto a rocky plateau a click from the target. But as they moved into their initial position, the world exploded. A burst of machine gun fire, impossibly close, tore through the silence. The ambush was perfect. Rounds chewed through the dirt at their feet, forcing the team to scatter and dive for cover behind a low rock wall. Then the chatter on the radio was frantic but controlled. "Contact front! Heavy fire! We've got a man down!" Doc Jenkins was already crawling toward a crumpled figure. The enemy was in the high ground, their positions cleverly concealed in the craggy rock formations. They were pinned. Then the shooting stopped. Not a lull, but a complete, eerie silence. The SEALs, trained to be suspicious of silence, held their positions, waiting for the next onslaught. It never came. A tense minute passed. 2. The lieutenant gave the order to move, to flank the suspected enemy positions. When they reached the first rocky outcropping, they found the body of a fighter, a perfect hole drilled through his forehead. On the next perch, 2 more, both killed by a single, surgically precise round each. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of a firefight, and the enemy had just been removed. It was Lopez, the team's spotter, who saw it first. He pointed a trembling finger toward a distant peak, 1.5 miles away, a ridiculously long shot by anyone's standards. For a moment they caught a glint of light, a reflection off glass, and then it was gone. The team was confused, shaken. The lieutenant got on the radio, calling for a status update from command. The answer that came back was garbled, but they caught the code name, the one the rumors had whispered. They caught the word Falcon. They looked at Maya, who was calmly scanning the horizon, her carbine still slung across her chest. She hadn't fired a shot. She didn't have a rifle capable of a shot like that. But the look on her face wasn't surprise. It was a quiet, grim satisfaction. The SEALs stared at the distant ridge, and then back at the woman who was supposed to be their liability. The pieces started to click into place. They knew her as an analyst, but someone, somewhere out in those mountains, knew her as something else entirely. They were about to discover why. The silence that settled over the rocky battlefield was heavier than the gunfire that had preceded it. The SEALs moved with a new, sharp-edged urgency, their eyes constantly flicking from the dead insurgents to the distant ridgeline, and back to Maya. The lieutenant, a man named Carson who had seen more than his share of combat, knelt beside the first body. He examined the wound, a single entry point, no exit. It was a high-caliber anti-materiel round, the kind designed to punch through engine blocks, not the kind of ordnance a standard spotter carried. But he looked up at the impossible distance to the far peak, a shot that would challenge the very laws of physics. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Maya didn't answer. She was already moving toward the wounded SEAL, Doc Jenkins working frantically to stabilize him. The man, a young operator named Schmidt, had taken a round through the thigh, the femoral artery nicked. Blood pulsed with terrifying speed. "He's bleeding out," Jenkins snapped, his voice tight with panic. "I need pressure! Now! We're running out of time!" The team formed a defensive perimeter, their faces grim. They were hours from a casualty evacuation point, and Schmidt was fading fast. Maya slid into the dirt beside Jenkins. Without a word, she reached into a pocket on her vest and produced a surprisingly sophisticated field surgical kit. "Move your hands," she commanded. Jenkins hesitated for a fraction of a second, but there was something in her voice that didn't allow for argument. She worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. Her fingers, steady and sure, found the torn artery, applied a clamp, and began a field suture that would have made a trauma surgeon proud. She wasn't just a linguist. She wasn't just an analyst. She was a healer of an extraordinary caliber. Within minutes, the bleeding was under control. She administered a powerful painkiller, checked his vitals, and finally sat back on her heels, her face spattered with Schmidt's blood. "He'll live," she said quietly. "But we need to get him out of here yesterday." The team stared, their previous skepticism replaced by a stunned, profound respect. "Haas, where the hell did you learn to do that?" Hummer asked, his earlier hostility completely gone from his voice. "Med school," she replied, wiping her hands on a rag. "Before all this," she gestured vaguely at the mountains around them. "I was a trauma fellow at Mass General. Seems like a lifetime ago." The revelation was a seismic shock to the platoon. A doctor, a real honest-to-God surgeon, embedded with them. But the mystery of the dead insurgents still hung in the air, unresolved. As they waited for the extraction, the team couldn't help but steal glances at the ridgeline. They knew their own capabilities intimately. They knew what their snipers could do with a Mark 13 rifle. A mile-and-a-half shot in those wind conditions was a 1-in-a-million fluke. 2 precise kills on separate positions? That wasn't luck. That was a ghost. The extraction was a whirlwind of dust and rotor wash. Schmidt was loaded onto the Black Hawk, and the rest of the team followed, their minds churning. Back at Camp Lemonnier, the debriefing was intense. The lieutenant's report mentioned the effective supporting fire from an unknown element. The intelligence officers pressed for details, but Carson was vague. He didn't know what to say. How could he explain what he hadn't seen? Later that night, unable to sleep, Lopez found Maya sitting alone on the tarmac, looking up at the stars. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and desert dust. He sat down a respectful distance away, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he spoke. "The shot. Was it her? The one they talk about, the Falcon?" Maya turned to him, and for the first time, Lopez saw a flicker of something deeply human in her eyes. It wasn't pride or arrogance. It was a profound, bone-weary sadness. "Her name is Amara," Maya said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "She's my sister." The confession hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Lopez stared, his mouth open. "Your sister?" "She was a Chindit," Maya continued, using an old, revered term for the elite long-range reconnaissance units of a friendly foreign power, a group that operated in the shadows of the global war on terror. "The best spotter they ever trained. She could read the wind like a conductor reads music. When I was recruited for this assignment to hunt the director, I knew I needed an edge. I knew I needed her. She's been my insurance policy for 6 months. She walks the high ground, always a mile or two ahead, always watching." Lopez was trying to process the information. A 2-woman army, one a surgeon and cultural expert, the other a phantom on the ridges. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was the most incredible thing he'd ever heard. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why tell me?" "Because you asked," Maya said simply. "And because tomorrow, we're going back out. The director knows we're here now. He'll be moving, covering his tracks. Amara is tracking him as we speak, but she can't do it alone, and neither can I. We're going to need your team. We're going to need you to trust us. Really trust us." She stood up, brushing the dust from her pants. "Get some sleep, Lopez. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the base, leaving Lopez alone with the weight of her secret and the terrifying and exhilarating knowledge of what was to come. The legend was real, and she had a sister. The intelligence that Maya and her unseen sister Amara provided over the next 48 hours was nothing short of revolutionary. It wasn't just coordinates and estimated troop strengths. It was a living, breathing portrait of the enemy. Amara, from her impossible perches high in the mountains, would observe the director's camp with a spotting scope of such power it could read the expressions on a man's face from 2 miles away. She would note the nervous twitch of a guard, the arrival of a supply mule, the shift change at midnight when the watchers were most tired. Maya would translate this visual poetry into cold, actionable data for Bravo Platoon. They learned the director's real name was Hassan Gutale, a former Somali military officer with ties to international terrorist networks. They learned he wasn't just moving weapons. He was planning something big, something that involved a convoy of trucks loaded with sophisticated IED components destined for a major city. The SEALs were no longer chasing a ghost. They were hunting a man, and they had the world's best spotter guiding their every move. The relationship between Maya and the team had undergone a profound transformation. Hummer, the man who had so crudely labeled her a blue Falcon, now shadowed her like a protective older brother. Doc Jenkins, humbled by her surgical skill, sought her advice on every medical decision. They saw her not as an outsider, but as a crucial, irreplaceable component of their brotherhood. But there was a new tension, a new worry. The team had yet to meet Amara. She remained a myth, a whispered name on the radio, a fleeting glint of glass on a distant peak. They were in awe of her skill, but they were also concerned for Maya, who carried the burden of her sister's solitary war alone. The final mission was set. A night assault on Gutal's mountain compound, timed to coincide with Amara's observation that he would be meeting with his key lieutenants. The plan was risky. A fast rope insertion onto a plateau that was barely large enough to hold the 2 Blackhawks, a silent approach through a boulder field, and a simultaneous breach of the main building and a small outbuilding that served as a communications hub. As the helicopters thundered through the moonless night, the team was tense, but focused. Maya was with them, her carbine up, and her eyes scanning the darkness. This time, she wasn't just the guide, she was a combatant. They touched down without incident, the SEALs sliding down the ropes in practiced silence. They formed up and began their movement toward the target. The boulder field was a nightmare of uneven terrain and ankle-twisting crevices, but they moved through it with the fluid grace of practiced athletes. They were 50 meters from the main compound when the world exploded, just as it had before. But this time, there was no hesitation in the enemy's fire. They had been expecting them. The ambush was a wall of lead, pinning the team down instantly. The chatter on the radio was frantic. "They're everywhere! We're in a kill zone! Suppressing fire now!" The SEALs returned fire, but they were out in the open, caught in a deadly crossfire. Then, the shooting from the enemy's left flank stopped, then the right. In the brief lulls between the deafening roar of their own weapons, the SEALs heard it, the deep, percussive thump of a heavy sniper rifle firing from somewhere in the absolute blackness of the mountain above them. It was a sound of authority, of finality. It was Amara. She was working the battlefield like a surgeon, her shots not random, but meticulously chosen. A machine gunner here, a spotter there, a man with an RPG on a ridge. She was dismantling the ambush piece by piece, giving the SEALs the precious seconds they needed to regain their footing. Carson saw his chance. "Bravo! On me! We push through now! Go! Go! Go!" The team surged forward, their advance covered by that impossible, unwavering fire from the darkness. They reached the outer wall of the compound, using it for cover as they methodically cleared the enemy positions. The firefight was intense, brutal, and close quarters. Maya was in the thick of it, her carbine barking as she dropped a fighter who had emerged from a side door, his weapon raised. She moved with a tactical precision that surprised even the SEALs, her movements economical and deadly. They breached the main building, clearing room by room. In the central meeting hall, they found Gutale, not surrounded by his men, but alone, crouched behind an overturned table, a pistol in his hand. He fired wildly, the shots pinging off the walls. Hummer and Lopez returned fire, their rounds tearing into the table and the man behind it. It was over. The director was down. As the gunfire subsided, replaced by the heavy breathing of the men and the crackle of the radio, the team secured the room. Doc Jenkins moved to check on the downed combatants. The mission was a success, but as they prepared to call for extraction, a new sound filtered through the ringing in their ears. It was the crunch of a boot on gravel outside the building. Every weapon in the room swung toward the door. A figure appeared in the doorway. She was tall and lean, dressed in the tattered camouflage-patterned clothing of a mountain fighter. Her face was smudged with dirt, her dark hair a tangled mess. But her eyes, the same sharp, intelligent eyes as Maya's, blazed with an intensity that was almost feral. Slung across her back was the largest rifle any of them had ever seen, a bolt-action beast with a barrel that seemed to go on forever. It was Amara. She looked past the leveled weapons, past the tense faces of the SEALs, and then found her sister. For a long, breathless moment, the two women just stared at each other, the warrior and the surgeon, the ghost and the guide. Then, without a word, Maya crossed the room and embraced her sister, holding her tight. The SEALs watched in stunned silence, their weapons slowly lowering. The legend had stepped out of the shadows. The Falcon had come home. The silence in the aftermath of the firefight was a living thing, thick with cordite and the heavy breath of exhausted men. The SEALs, hardened by years of combat, stood frozen, their weapons half lowered, witnessing a reunion that felt too private, too sacred for their eyes. Maya held her sister for a long time, her face buried in Amara's tangled hair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Amara, the phantom of the mountains, stood rigid for a moment, unaccustomed to human contact, before her own body relaxed, and she wrapped her arms around Maya, returning the embrace. Finally, Maya pulled back, her eyes wet, a smile breaking through the grime on her face. She turned to the team. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "meet my sister Amara, the one you've been calling Falcon." The team murmured greetings, their voices awkward, unsure. Hummer stepped forward, his massive frame seeming to fill the room. He looked at Amara, then at the rifle on her back, then back at her face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I owe you an apology, and a debt. You saved our hides out there, twice." Amara regarded him with a gaze that was both assessing and weary. She said nothing, only giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Carson, the lieutenant, took charge. We need to move. Extraction is 20 minutes out. We've got a high-value target, KIA, and we've got a lot of questions to answer. Let's get this place sanitized and get the hell out of here." The extraction was a blur of activity. The team quickly gathered intelligence from the compound, Amara pointing out a hidden cache of documents that the SEALs would have missed. As the Blackhawks descended, kicking up a vortex of dust and debris, the sisters climbed aboard together, sitting side by side. For the first time in 6 months, Amara was leaving the mountains. The flight back to Camp Lemonnier was quiet. The SEALs were exhausted, their adrenaline faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. But there was also a sense of profound accomplishment and a deep, abiding curiosity about the two women sitting among them. Back at the base, the debriefing was a marathon. Intelligence officers, base commanders, and even a few somber men in civilian clothes were eager to talk to Maya and especially to Amara. But Amara was gone as quickly as she had appeared, whisked away to a secure location, her identity and her future a closely guarded secret. In the days that followed, life at the base slowly returned to a strange kind of normal. The SEALs trained, prepped for the next mission, and waited. But they were different. They carried with them the memory of what they had witnessed. One evening, a week after the mission, a package was delivered to the Bravo platoon's quarters. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a neat, precise script. It was from Maya. She thanked them for their trust, for their courage, and for proving that her faith in them was not misplaced. And she explained that Amara was safe, that she was finally getting the medical and psychological support she needed after years of living like a wraith in the wilderness. She wrote of her own future, of a permanent position with a special operations command, using her unique blend of skills to bridge the gap between intelligence and action. She was no longer a contractor. She was one of them. But it was the final paragraph that silenced the room and brought a lump to the throats of the hardened warriors. Maya wrote that Amara, the Falcon, had asked her to pass on a message. "Tell them," Maya wrote, "that it was an honor to watch their backs. Tell them that in the mountains I was alone. But when I watched them fight, I did not feel alone. Tell them, thank you for bringing my sister home." The letter ended not with a formal signature, but with a simple drawing. Two falcons in flight, their wings intertwined against a rising sun. Hummer carefully folded the letter and placed it in the pocket of his uniform over his heart. The legend of the Falcon was no longer a whisper. It was a truth etched into their souls, a story of two sisters who had redefined the meaning of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family forged in the harshest crucible on earth. And they, the SEALs of Bravo Platoon, would carry that story with them forever.